It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna! Welcome to a brand new, clean-sounding edition of Rico Brogna, episode number 418. We have a lot to talk about. The brutal honesty of Mets owner Steve Cohen from Amazin Day and what he said about Pete Alonso. First of all, Amazin Day was a lot of fun. It was very cool meeting a lot of you, so that was really cool. For those that tried to listen to Amazin Day live or on our podcast, we apologize. There was some major audio quality issues, but here's the beauty of it. I was saying this to Hoff. We plan on doing a lot of live Ricos. We are going to spring training in early March, so let's get the kinks out of the way. Why not work those kinks out when you're talking to legends like David Wright and Mookie Wilson? But we do apologize. Yeah, it happens, but we will be back and better and stronger than ever when we do future live Rico Brognas. So we're sorry for that. But if you still want to listen to episode number 417 from Amazin Day, and you can get through the bad audio, really fun conversations with Mookie Wilson, with David Wright, and then eventually with the great Bobby Valentine. As far as Amazin Day was concerned, it seemed pretty cool. A lot of people were there. The Mets did a great job of getting so many former players there and basically every current player. You know, we heard about the Juan Soto plane issues coming out of the DR, which affected him, Dednell Nunez, and Huascar Brazabon. But outside of that, I mean, everybody was there. So it was a really cool event. I guess the Mets did have a fan fest in 2020, right before the pandemic. I vaguely remember it. I didn't go to it. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what was going on, but this one was really, really big, and there was a lot of stuff going on. I think the only critique I heard from a few friends of mine that were there, and I could certainly feel it, was that it was too busy, that there were just so many people there that autograph lines were very long and just getting around was very long. So I don't know how you change that other than maybe selling fewer tickets. But overall, I hope you had a good time if you went to Amazin Day. If you didn't go to Amazin Day, here's the headline. And this is what we're going to address here today on the Rico. And that is the fact that Steve Cohen and David Stearns addressed the Pete Alonso situation. And they didn't only address the Pete Alonso situation, they were freaking honest, especially Steve Cohen. So before we play what Steve had to say, what David had to say, the fans' reaction to it, and we'll analyze every nook and cranny from it, let me start off by saying thank you. Thank you to Steve Cohen and David Stearns for answering the uncomfortable questions. Because, and I said this on the live Amazin Day podcast. If you heard it, I'll recap it if you didn't hear it. And that is, it's not easy for David Stearns if he's at Amazin Day, because Met fans are all going to scream at him, go get Pete Alonso, go bring back Pete Alonso, Pete Alonso, Pete Alonso, Pete Alonso. He's going to get a lot of that. And while David Stearns is a stone cold killer, and he's not checking Twitter, and he's not listening to the Rico necessarily, or listening to WFAN, he is a human. And when you're walking around a stadium of a fan of a team that you grew up rooting for, it's only natural that people screaming at you, keep Pete Alonso, keep Pete Alonso, keep Pete Alonso, may affect you as a human being. Well, David Stearns not only walked around and heard that from fans, he sat there at a desk, at a podium, in a Q&A session with Steve Cohen, with Carlos Mendoza, and had to hear Met fans' reactions and also tried to explain it to everybody. What I appreciate from Cohen and Stearns is that what we want as fans is we want you to tell us the truth. Now, I know it's tough to tell us the truth when you're in the middle of a negotiation. It's tough to tell us the truth when you're talking about, maybe trading your own players or acquiring players on other teams. So I get that you can't hear the 100% truth during the offseason from a team president and from a team owner. But in this situation, a situation that is so emotional to a lot of us, we just want to hear your truth. And I say your truth because here's the reality. Steve Cohen said what he said. We're about to listen to it. Scott Boras responded with what he said. I'll tell you what he said a little bit later on. And the reality is the truth may be somewhere in the middle. But let's hear what happened today at Amazin Day. It was a panel that was being hosted by the great Gary Cohen. He had Carlos Mendoza, he had David Stearns, and he had Steve Cohen. And you knew Gary Cohen was going to ask the question for all the people that were packed. I think it was the Piazza Club. In that Piazza Club that wanted to hear what are they going to say about the Pete Alonso situation. So let's take a listen to the entire interaction. And then trust me, there are many aspects of this. Met fans booing, what Stearns said, what Cohen said, Boris's reaction that we will break down. So here it is, the interaction from Amazin Day.
Those just few weeks left, the big elephant in the room is the fact that Pete Alonso is still a free agent. David, where do things stand?
Look, I think we all love Pete, and we've said that many times. And I think as we've gone through this process, we've continued to express that. And we also understand that this is a business, and Pete, as a free agent, deserves the right and has the right and earned the privilege, really, to see what's out there. We also feel really good about the young players who are coming through our system, who have the ability to play at the major league level. We saw that last year, and that's not always the most popular opinion, but we saw that last year. And we're going to need to see it again.
Hey, hold on, guys. All right. All right. So, guys, let's hold that for the end, okay? We've made a significant offer to Pete, and what Davis says correct. He's entitled to go out and explore his market, and that's what he's doing. Personally, this has been an exhausting conversation and negotiation. I mean, Soto was tough. This is worse. Okay, and a lot of it is, we've made a significant. I don't like the structures that are being presented back to us. I think it's highly asymmetric against us, and I feel strongly about it. And so, I will never say no. There's always the possibility, but the reality is, we're moving forward, and we continue to bring in players. As we continue to bring in players, the reality is, it becomes harder to fit Pete into what is a very expensive group of players that we already have. And that's where we are. And I'm being brutally honest. I don't like the negotiations. I don't like what's been presented to us. Listen, maybe that changes, and certainly, I'll always stay flexible. If it stays this way, I think we're going to have to get used to the fact that, we may have to go forward and with the existing players that we have.
There is a lot to that clip. There's a lot to it. Let me start off by saying, and I hope you all heard that, and we can come to the same conclusion and just put this out of its misery before it builds any more steam. Met fans were not booing David Stearns. Okay? They weren't booing David Stearns. They weren't booing Steve Cohen. They booed the backup plan. If Pete's gone, we got a lot of good young players that can step in. That doesn't mean they were booing Brett Beatty necessarily or booing Ronnie Mauricio specifically, but that boo was not a boo of screw you, David Stearns, or screw you, Steve Cohen, or just give Pete Alonso whatever he wants. It was a boo of, he's talking up the younger players as if that's the backup plan, and that's what Met fans were booing. That's how I took that, first of all, because I already heard my guy Al Cintron, who I love, and he comes from the same place as all of us. He's a diehard Met fan, and I like listening to Al, but I heard him in his open already say Met fans are idiots. They booed David Stearns. Now, there's the clip. We can all decide it. I'm sure I'll get plenty of emails at the ricob@gmail.com that says, Evan, what's wrong with you? They were booing David Stearns. Maybe it's semantics. They weren't booing David Stearns. They weren't telling David Stearns, hey, you're an idiot. That was a disappointment boo to the backup plan. Now, I'm not saying I would have done that if I was there, because you're awkwardly are sort of indirectly booing the younger players who very well could become stars. And you heard even David Stearns say that. I know that's not the popular thing. And it's not the popular thing. And I think most people would agree with that. Even if that's the smartest thing, if they lose Pete, to not go out and do something foolish. And I'm not sure what else you can really do that's foolish. By the way, even trading for Spencer Torkelson, which I wanted to touch on, that rumor that Pat Ragazzo mentioned, that's not even foolish. Spencer Torkelson may suck, but if you're going to get him for a song, you're not going to give up much for him. And you're going to say, all right, let's just see different organization, different philosophy. Maybe we can open something up with Torkelson. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not giving up a top prospect for him. So, Hoff, you tell me if I'm wrong here before we get into all the other stuff. I just want to put that to bed. They weren't booing David Stearns. It was a disappointment boo to the idea that if Pete isn't here, it's just internal options.
Yeah, I think 100% you nailed it. Like, I don't think anyone dislikes David Stearns and what he's doing with his team. I mean, we can all disagree with how he's approaching it, but the success so far has been there, and he trusts his system, and there's a reason why Cohen brought him in, and I do trust him. I hate that Pete Alonso may have to be not a part of this team anymore because of it. But yeah, and the plan B is not up to my standings, my what I want to see. But yeah, that's where the boos are coming from, the backup plan.
By the way, one thing I do want to add to the Rico Brogna, and Hoff will figure it out because the guy's a freaking genius and he does everything off no sleep, which I give him a lot of credit for. I love sports talk radio, how we take calls. So I'll give an opinion, and a caller will call in and say you're an idiot. We have to incorporate you, the Rico listeners, instantly being able to come on the Rico Brogna, whether it's via video or audio, to debate an opinion. So like something such as David Stearns wasn't being booed, we are going to incorporate a feature at some point where we can go to, all right, let's go to Bob in New Rochelle. Bob, Evan, you're an idiot. They were booing David Stearns. So that is a feature to the Rico Brogna that we will add soon. We're going to figure that out. I promise you. Now, let's get to the rest of what was said. Forget David Stearns. Forget about the rest of what David Stearns said, because I think a lot of things happened in this discussion, one of which is Steve Cohen's response and opinion on the negotiations and opinion on how he doesn't like these negotiations kind of told us something that maybe I was wrong about, which is he is really involved in this Pete Alonso situation. This is not, all right, David, go do what you got to do. Because David Stearns was very, I would say, he didn't give you much. Just, yeah, we'd love Pete back. It's a business. He has a right to be a free agent, blah, blah, blah. Like, he gave you regular team president GM talk. And then Steve Cohen, who basically tells the fans, hold on to your chance. I got to unleash a truth bomb on Scott Boris's ass, comes out and basically says, these negotiations are awful. David Stearns didn't come anywhere close to saying that, which tells you that Boris and Cohen didn't just negotiate the Juan Soto deal. They've talked a lot about Pete Alonso. And while David Stearns has his opinion, and we all kind of have an idea what that opinion is, and it's not that he doesn't want him back. That's repeated a lot. I know even you've said that, Hoff. It's not that he doesn't want him back. It's that they view him as a player that is worth whatever amount of money. And by the way, $23.5 million, that same offer that was made a few years ago, just over a longer period of time, the same AAV offer they made a few weeks ago. The truth is David Stearns probably views him for less. He probably views him as an $18 million a year ball player. And that extra 5.5 is the stuff that me and Badingo and some other Met fans are fawning for, which is, oh, he's a homegrown Met. We got to keep him. That's probably how they get to 23. They probably don't even view him as a $23 million a year player. And that can piss everybody off. I'm just reporting what I think we're seeing here. I'm just telling you what I think they're thinking. So David Stearns is probably saying, I'd take him back for this amount of money. Now you got Steve Cohen, who's negotiated a lot with Scott Boras over the years. Let's not forget the Carlos Correa stuff. Let's not forget that. And let's certainly not forget the Juan Soto negotiation. For Steve Cohen to come out and basically say, I hate the negotiations. I think everything they're doing is very one-sided, even though they've broken them off a long-term contract, I think tells you everything you need to know. And I don't think it's Steve Cohen playing a game in terms of, well, he doesn't really want Pete back. This is a PR battle. No, I think this was Steve Cohen telling you Scott Boras is a douche. Scott Boras is being unreasonable in these negotiations. And so, first of all, I appreciate the fact, I really do, that Steve Cohen basically came out here and dropped that kind of pipe bomb. I do. And I don't think it was about, oh, this is going to be a great part of our negotiation, or this is going to be great for our PR battle. I don't think that was in his head at all. I think it was simply, I'm going to tell you guys the truth. I want the player back. Scott Boras is being unreasonable. Now, Met fans, and I'm on the side of wanting Pete Alonso back, okay? A lot of us are. But I also want to be fair about this. I want to call this down the middle. Does anybody think Scott Boras isn't being unreasonable? Does anybody out there think, boy, Steve Cohen's just making a bunch of crap up and Scott Boras is being more than fair in these negotiations? We've seen this before from him. We've seen this where he's killed his own clients before with these kinds of negotiations, where he's asking for things that are crazy. I'll tell you one thing I heard about these negotiations. I heard that as part of the opt-out plans, like 3-year deal, opt out, you get to become a free agent, that Boras was trying to get even more money if he opts out. Like, all right, the salary is 25. If you opt out, throw him $5 extra million and he opts out. Like things like that. Because Scott is trying to, realizing I can't get a 6-year deal. I got to get a 3-year deal with opt-outs. But how do I make it so good for my client? So something like that, if that's truly what Scott Boras is asking for, that's kind of nuts. It really is. Like, all right, you have an opt-out, but then if you opt out, you get even more money. Like, I want the player back too. I do. And Steve Cohen's a billionaire, and he drops $1 billion and forgets about it. We can make all the comments we want about how much money he has. But the reason he's a self-made billionaire is he doesn't get bent over. And he doesn't get taken advantage of. And so Scott Boras, who has a reputation for doing this, even with the clients that aren't capable of taking this kind of money because they're coming off a bad year or there isn't a big market for them. That's what Scott Boras is doing. I believe Steve Cohen. I do. Why wouldn't I? Oh, are we really going to choose to believe Scott Boras over Steve Cohen? And here's what Boras said, by the way, in terms of what Cohen said about the negotiations. Pete's free agent contract structure requests are identical to the standards and practices of other clubs who have signed similarly situated qualifying offer all-star level players. Nothing different. Just established fairness standards. All right, so no more rhymes for Scott. No more little riddles for Scott. Now he means business. Now he's going straight up to the lawyer talk. I have no reason to pick a side because ultimately, if Pete Alonso is not a Met, that is disappointing to me and it's disappointing to you. So at the end of the day, I would love Pete Alonso to be a New York Met. But if I'm going to try to be an umpire in this thing and call it down the middle, Scott Boras, and the fact that Pete's still a free agent, and the fact that we haven't heard one reported offer to him, not one. We hear he's on the 10-yard line with the Blue Jays. Well, Andy Martino, that 10-yard drive is lasting forever. It's been 4 days they're stuck on the 10-yard. Were they called for some personal fouls? Were there some pre-snap penalties that push? Was it like 1st and goal from the 50 now because of all the penalties? But we have heard no concrete offer from any other team. For the Met offer, we heard that. We have not heard an offer from any other team. So I have no reason to think Steve Cohen is full of crap. I got no reason to. I have no reason to think that Steve Cohen all of a sudden has said, I'm cheap now. I'm protecting my dollars. This is on Scott Boras. And ultimately, this is on Pete Alonso. And what I am afraid of, and I said this last week, and I'm still afraid of it, because Steve Cohen didn't put clarity on the next thing I'm about to say, which is, what if Pete calls up Steve tonight? What if he calls him up and says, hey, I heard what you said. By the way, I also saw you at the Knicks game. If it was up to me, I would have chosen Vince Carter retirement night, but okay, you run the Mets. I'm just kidding. I want to make a deal, Steve. I want to be a Met. I heard what you said. Is it possible that Steve Cohen's going to say too late? Because think about what he said at the end of that clip. Hey, we have a very expensive roster. We are spending money elsewhere. It may come to a point where we can't fit you on this expensive roster. Now, keep this in mind. Fitting him is not going to be about a player they add positionally, because I don't think they are adding a guy positionally that would block Pete Alonso. It's about money. It's about the tax. It's about, and I get it, it's tough for us to bitch about payroll when the Mets are going to have a very high payroll, but it's about Steve saying, no, I've spent enough. Sorry, not going to do it. And that's what worries me, because even if we get this reversal from Pete, is it too late? That's the thing we don't know from what Steve Cohen said today. But quite frankly, I appreciate him coming out and saying something, and it's worked on a lot of fans, and it's working on me. This is on Scott Boras. This is on Pete Alonso. They've got to do more if this is ever going to happen and Pete's going to stay a Met.
You know what? What do you think Pete Alonso can do at this point in time? Do you think he could say, okay, I'll take less money, give me a 1-year deal? Like, what do you think he can possibly say? Because at this point, I think you're right. The only thing that they could do is all four of those guys got to sit in a room and just get it out. Get it out in the open and just work on something to get it done.
Here's what he can do. Okay, so when this all began, and it's so funny to think back to some of the Ricos we've done talking about fake contracts for Pete Alonso. We were doing it last year. We did an off-season Rico on what an extension would look like for Pete Alonso. Well, the market dictates everything. And sometimes you don't know what the market's going to look like. And the market clearly has taken a giant dump on Pete Alonso. And it's happened for a myriad of reasons. Many want to say it's the fact he didn't have a great year last year. Sure, that's part of it. He didn't have a great year last year. We talked about that all year on the Rico. I love the guy, but it was not an exceptionally clutch year for Pete Alonso. It's also the type of player he is. Right-handed, non-athletic slugger, first base. The market has destroyed Pete Alonso. So knowing that, knowing this is what happened, and knowing that there has not been, as I said, one reported offer from any other team, that does not exist. We don't know when he meets with the Angels what they're even offering him, what the Blue Jays have offered him. Because I'd assume there is an offer. I just don't know what it is. It could be far worse than the Met offer. And when you look at what Profar got, and you look at what Santander got in terms of average annual salary, their AAV is far less, or less, if you don't want to use far less, than what the Mets are offering Pete Alonso. So to answer your question, I think, and this is why Boras would never do it, this is an Alonso thing. You got to go back to the Mets and say, you know, that offer you made last week is actually pretty good. I want to take it. I don't know if it's a negotiation, because the Mets sound done negotiating. It sounds like the Mets are at the point of, bro, we went as far as we would go. You don't have any other offer. We've been telling you for months you're a free agent. God bless you. Tell us what you got. You don't have anything. So why are we going to move our offer if there's no other offer? And so this is why it's tough to believe this is going to work out. It is, because I don't know if Scott Boras, other than Pete firing him, and I don't know if Pete's going to do that. Pete already fired an agent. He already is resting on Scott Boras. But other than Pete calling up the Mets and saying, look, the more I think about it, the offer you gave me is better than anything I'm going to get. Let's just make a deal. Hopefully it's still there. I don't know how this gets fixed, because you saw it with Boras's comments. He's digging in. And if Boras digs in, look, he may not end up with another team anytime soon because, again, there is no other offer, but this isn't going to end. And the more time that goes by, if the Mets add another player or two, you heard what Steve said about the very expensive roster, and it puts this thing to bed. And it's sad because this is an unfortunate way for them to break up.
And it's funny. This is why I still feel like Pete Alonso really does want to be a Met because, like you said, there's no other offers, there's conversations. But does he really want to go anywhere else? Is he really saying, hey, I'll go to the Angels. Can you give me something? I'll go to Toronto. Can you give me something? I feel like he really wants the Mets to come to him because he wants to stay with the Mets. I do. I have that weird feeling.
I don't know what Pete's thinking. I think there's a world where Pete's bitter about this, where Pete hears what Steve Cohen says, what David Stern says, sees their offers and says, no, you don't even want me back. Screw you. I don't want to come back. Now, the problem with all of that is, like you said, if there's no other offer or if the other offer is less, that's what I think may be the case here. That the Blue Jays would like to sign Pete Alonso, even if it means giving up another draft pick. I think the Angels, sure, they'd like to sign Pete Alonso, but you start to think, okay, well, what has their offer been? Is it possible their offer is less than the Met offer? And I think that's a possibility. And if that's the case, then there's reasons why we're not hearing about the other offer. Like the team isn't going to leak it, the Angels or the Blue Jays. They've got no reason to if it's less than the Met offer. And Boris isn't going to leak it because what does that do? So this sucks, man. And it sucks because I see why this is occurring. I see why the breakup is occurring. I don't think I'm being irrational today. I'm not simply saying, all right, Steve, you got $1 billion, just pay him. I'm not saying any of that because I get it. I understand as much as I want the player back. I understand why a smart billionaire isn't going to negotiate against himself. I get it. So yelling at Steve Cohen wouldn't make any sense. So I'm not. What I'm telling you as a Met fan is that we are watching something that is so freaking unfortunate. That's the reality. We're watching something that is, it just sucks, man. Like, I think back to the DeGrom breakup. And as mad as I was, and I'll stand by this point, no one's been proven right or wrong about Jacob DeGrom yet. I know the first few years hasn't gone well, but guy comes back and wins the Cy Young this year. Don't tell me how smart the Mets were. But whatever. That's a different Rico Brogna. We'll do a whole Rico Brogna debating the Jacob DeGrom situation. But what was nice about the DeGrom situation, even if I couldn't appreciate it in the moment, is that we were put out of our misery. Relatively early in the offseason, Mets made an offer. Mets wanted him back, right? They just wanted him back at their price and their years, okay? That's what they wanted. Not here to debate that. They made an offer, and they made a decent offer to Jacob DeGrom. The Rangers made a far better offer to Jacob DeGrom. And so DeGrom takes it. Mets were never going to match it anyway, and we just react to it, and we move on. Like, it's gone. It's over. It sucks. Jake's not here. The Rangers offered more. The Mets didn't. Fight about it for a few days, and that's it. This is a slow death. That's what it is. Because even when you hear what Steve Cohen said and what David Stern said and Boris's response, you just heard Hoff say it. My man Loogie said it on WFAN too. The back of your mind, you're like, oh, they could still work it out. They can still work it out. And this reminds me of, I don't know how often this has happened to you, Hoff, or anyone in our audience, where you get dumped, you get broken up with, and you check your phone like every day for the next month thinking she's going to change her mind. And the truth is she's not. She dumped your ass. She's not going to change her mind. But you have hope maybe she will. Maybe she will. And it doesn't happen. And it feels like that's what we're going to do. Until Pete Alonso signs with another team and is a member of the Blue Jays or the Angels or wherever, we're going to sit back and say, well, they still want each other. It's going to happen. They're going to make it work. And I think Steve Cohen's words told you at Amazin Day, while there's a possibility, never say never, they sound done. And they sound done because, A, they don't think Scott Boras is going to come back and say, we'll accept your deal. And then the other thing is, like I mentioned, my fear is the Mets are going to say the offer's not there anymore. And it's already being reported that it may not be there anymore. Now, I'm skeptical. Is A.J. Minter's contract $11 million and Jesse Winker's contract enough to say they won't add the $23.5 million on AAV to Pete Alonso? I push comes to shove. If you give me the truth serum, I would think if Pete came back, they'd say, all right, fine, we'll add him. You know, this would still be a lower payroll than last year. And I assumed even if they got Alonso back on that offer, they were going to try to add a reliever like A.J. Minter, that it would still make sense to bring back Jesse Winker. So I hold out hope that the door hasn't completely shut on this whole situation. But boy, it is late January, and knowing Scott Boras, he doesn't flip in late January. He doesn't even flip in the middle of February. Pete Alonso may take his free agency into March. And if he takes it into March, like we're down at spring training, we're going down on March 8th and 9th, and Pete Alonso is unsigned. I mean, are you kidding me? We're still going to think it could possibly happen. But I thought today, or Amazing Day yesterday, depending on when you've downloaded this, Rico Brogna, I thought it was a positive thing for Steve Cohen to do this. I think it was important. And I think it's a lesson for other owners in this town. Sometimes it's okay to turn the mic on and just tell us the deal. Because I think when we have this discourse, when we talk about it, we hear the owner's perspective, a lot of times we're going to say, oh, wow, I agree with him. I didn't think about it that way. Like hearing the owner forcefully say, I do not like this negotiation. The Juan Soto thing was better, tells you how he feels about the way Scott Boras has been negotiating. And look, here's the big difference between Juan Soto and Pete Alonso. Soto is tough. This is worse. Here's the difference. Cohen knew, like we all did, when you're bidding on Juan Soto, you're bidding against a lot of different teams. You're bidding against the Yankees. You're bidding against the Red Sox. You're bidding against the Blue Jays. And you know that everything Scott asks for, at least in the early stages, well, another team's going to offer it. So if you want to dance, if you want to get this kind of player, you're going to have to go this far. And if you're not comfortable, get the hell out. Eventually, the Yankees got the hell out. And so I think a negotiation like this for a player like that with so many teams involved is, hey, this is the price of doing business. When you are talking to a player in which you ultimately think no one else is bidding and you're negotiating against yourself, and yet the agent is talking as if he's got you by the short hairs, yeah, that's frustrating. That's right. You're bidding on a house. You want the house. You'd like the house. And you made a very fair bid for the house. But the realtor is asking for $400,000 more. And you're at that house and you see no one's coming by. No one's bidding on that house. As much as you want that house and you think you're making a reasonable offer, the agent is not only asking for an absurd amount of money, they're asking for an absurd amount of money without anyone else making that offer. And that's the problem. So I'm accepting it. I'm learning to accept it as a Met fan. And look, here's the other thing about accepting it and talking about what Pete Alonso means to all of us. And I say this to Beningo. I say this to anyone else who's still on the homegrown thing. The reason I've moved off of he's ours, he's Strawberry, he's David Wright, is not because he isn't, even though he's not. It's because even if they make a deal, even if Pete came back and made a deal, this breakup is happening. So in my mind, if he's not going to be a career Met and he's not hitting 500 home runs as a Met, which is clearly not happening, what are we talking about then? Then we should be looking at him as a player you'd rather have on the team, not a, oh my God, you're doing this to me again. Because even if it works out, he's not going to be a career Met. Can someone walk me through the world in which he ends up as a career Met, even if this negotiation ends with him re-signing? I'm not even going to bring up again that he's not Tom Seaver and he's not Darryl Strawberry and he's not David Wright. I don't want to put him down as a player, but he's not. It's more the latter, not the latter, the former. It's more the former to me. Like, he's not going to be a career Met. Does that make any difference to you, Hoff, when you think about it, that even if this works and we got our guy back, and I'd be very happy about it, that ultimately he's going to play for another team in a year or two? It's clearly it's written on the wall.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating. You're right. Like, I think David Wright had the comments of, I hope he gets the opportunity to be a lifelong Met, but we know that's not the case because they don't really value him that way, which is crazy. So yeah, I just, like, at this point in time, it's going to suck regardless when he leaves, but I don't see he's got more than 3 years left for this franchise if he comes back.
Right. And right now it's tough to imagine that he's coming back. I mean, I don't know how this gets fixed. So here's the reality. It was confirmed throughout Amazin Day that Brett Beatty has a first baseman's glove and is working out at first base. Mark Vientos obviously has some experience at first base, is working out at first base. And so there are internal options in which, yes, the crowd booed at the thought of it, but that's what, unfortunately, we are going to rely on as New York Met fans. We are going to rely on, hopefully, Brett Beatty, wearing number 7, is the Mark Vientos of 2025. One thing about Vientos, the whole first base, third base thing, if Pete isn't brought back. I think if Mark Vientos moves to first base, and that's ultimately what they decide to do, and he works his tuchus off the way he's worked his ass off at third base, he could probably ultimately become a good first baseman. I think if you work hard, you could turn yourself into anything. I mean, Wade Boggs is such a great example of that back in the day at third base. So it's not that Mark Vientos can't turn himself into a good first baseman. In the short term, again, if you look at the amount of games he's played at AAA, in the minor leagues, in the major leagues, at third base and first base, you do see an enormous split. This is not a new position for him. I've never claimed that it is. It's just a position he's played far less than third base. So hearing Brett Beatty work out at first base is intriguing to me because he's the guy who's learning second. He's the guy that he's learning the outfield. He's the guy who I'd like to see him learn first base, because I think ideally in this post-Alonzo world, I like the idea of Mark Vientos continuing to grow as a third baseman. I also don't fully believe that Ronnie Mauricio is going to have a major impact on this roster in the first half of the year because he's coming off a major injury. Luis Angel Acuna, interesting. Carlos Mendoza thinks he's going to have a big impact on 2025. Well, if that's the case, it's probably not going to be at third base. It's probably going to be at second base or in center field. And if it happens at second base, all of a sudden, Jeff McNeil becomes an option at either first base or third base. But I'm starting to like the idea of Vientos mostly playing third base and Brett Beatty getting a lot of experience at first. And this leads to a guy I mentioned earlier in the podcast, a guy who I know it's easy to jump on and say, what the hell? Why would you want this guy? But I am intrigued by Spencer Torkelson. I say that laughing a little bit because he was so crappy last year and even got sent down to AAA and was crappy in AAA. His major league numbers last year, he played 92 games. He hit .219 with a .669 OPS, and he struck out 105 times. His strikeout percentage was 27% last year, which higher than Pete Alonso, by the way. His walk percentage is a little bit above the major league average, so he can draw a walk. But what I'm intrigued by is the fact that he's a former top prospect, former first-round pick. Wasn't he first overall? Like, he was number one prospect. He had a pretty good power year 2 years ago when he had 34 home runs. The rest of his numbers weren't great. Didn't hit for a high average, struck out 1 billion times. I mean, basically, he's a worse version of Pete Alonso offensively. Better defensively, apparently. But I can get him for nothing. Like, if I can get him for nothing, hear me out on this. If I can get him for nothing, and I'm assuming Mauricio's in AAA, trying to prove he's healthy, recover off a torn ACL. Acuna's not really a third baseman. He'll probably play second base, maybe a little bit center field. I've talked a lot on these offseason Ricos about Siri and Taylor being, place guards basically until one of the younger guys steps in. So I don't really see Acuna as the answer at the third base, first base problem. So if Vientos is playing third, I kind of like the idea of, all right, Brett Beatty's going to get another opportunity, and here's Spencer Torkelson. And let's see if a different organization, a different league, different hitting instructors, let's see if that can make a little bit of a difference. He does have better numbers against lefties. They're not huge. It's not like he's a lefty masher, but you start him off as a platoon player who also gives you good defense at first base. I don't hate the idea. Is it better than Pete Alonso? Of course not. I'm not going to say that. I already told you. He's a worse version of Pete Alonso. Even in his best season, he's a worse version of Pete Alonso. But I like the idea of a former prospect I can get for nothing. I like him in that little platoon with Beatty. It keeps Vientos at third base. I don't hate it.
$800,000. That's what he's estimated at making this year.
Yeah.
So I do hate it for that reason, because it's like, let's take a risk on somebody who we don't know what he's going to do, but he's so cheap. Why the hell not? It's frustrating to me. It's frustrating.
No, because you're looking at it the wrong way. You're looking at his finances. Well, he's a young player. He's a prospect that's never developed. I'm saying I want Pete back. I feel like I got to say this every 5 minutes. I want him back. We just went through the reasons why it doesn't look like he's coming back, and a lot of it's on Pete. Okay? So I'm just thinking of different alternate ways to fill that spot. And while it's mostly going to be internal, I like the idea of adding an actual first baseman, by the way. A guy who plays the freaking position and apparently plays it reasonably well. That's what you hear from people that watch the guy. And then the idea of, you know what, maybe a change in scenarios. Let me tell you something. This is a good one. I'm pulling a big one out of my ass right now. This is a good one. I don't know how many people were able to hear the Bobby Valentine interview. That's episode towards the back end of 417.
Yes.
But we had Bobby on, and the first thing Bobby wanted to talk about was Rico Brogna. Like, hey, I managed Rico. I love Rico. Let me tell you something about Rico Brogna. He was a first-round pick, and at the time was a failed prospect. That's what he was. He was a failed prospect for the Detroit Tigers. He barely made it to the major leagues, and when he did briefly in 1992, he wasn't good. He was a first-round pick by the Tigers. They traded him for nothing to the New York Mets for Alan Zinter, who also was a failed prospect. And then Rico came here and proved himself into being a Major League Baseball player. He may not have become what he was supposed to be, but he became a very solid Major League player. So on a podcast named in honor of Rico Brogna, the idea of trading for a first baseman who's a first-round pick, who's a failed prospect, come on, man. It's like full circle, bro.
But hold on here, okay? Let me just – this is where I have issues with this philosophy.
Go ahead.
So, okay. Vientos is clearly playing somewhere. That's a given. He's going to be sitting playing either first base, third base, maybe he's a DH, whatever the case is. And say if you get Spencer Torkelson in, and he's playing first base on a day where Vientos is playing DH, and Brett Beatty's playing third base, and you got Tyrone Taylor and Siri splitting squad out in center field, and McNeil's your second baseman having another bad year, and Alvarez is not really rebounding as much as we want to. There's a lot of going on there. Too much for me in a lineup where Soto is supposed to be a star with Lindor, but you're not giving him enough to back him up. And to me, this is where Nimmo, I'm just breaking down the lineup here. This is where Nimmo, I don't think he's a top 3-4 type of guy in a lineup. I think he's got to be pushed back more. You've made him forced again to be in these top end spots.
But Hoff, if Alonso is gone, which I think most of us think is likely going to happen. This is likely the scenario we're talking about going into the season. It's not ideal. It's
Now
not
you know
what
why I
I
got
wanted,
booed.
but what?
This is why you know that David Stearns got booed, because that's not a great plan.
No.
It's not a great plan.
What got booed is, yes, this is the backup plan. And in the short term, it's not great. I don't think anyone's claiming it is. It's relying on the unknown. It's relying on the unknown of Brett Beatty proving he's an everyday major league player, the unknown of this potential Spencer Torkelson trade, which I'm not even saying it's going to happen. It was just reported as an intriguing option by Pat Ragazzo. I'm just telling you where I could see it working and how I could see it working. Yeah, Met fans don't like the backup plan. But as David Stearns said, it's a part of this long-term vision. Now, what's their long-term vision at first base? It may not be Vladimir Guerrero Jr. It may be Ryan Clifford, who is in the building at Amazin Day. It may be the youth. It may be Ronnie Mauricio just picks up where he left off. Again, I don't think it'll be at the beginning of the season, but maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe it happens in June, and he becomes the third baseman. So, yeah, there's a lot of unknown quantities in this backup plan, and that's the booing. The booing is, right now on paper, that's not as good. I'm just dealing with okay, if this happens, here's what you could do. By the way, one other thing I do want to point out, and this is not an option for the New York Mets, I'd be stunned. But while talking about Pete Alonso and talking about Scott Boras and his practices in the negotiations, anyone hear anything about Alex Bregman? Like, does Alex Bregman exist anymore? Because he, too, is a Scott Boras client, and the talks around Bregman have just died. And how do you explain that, Scotty? And how is that going to look? One thing I remember reading about a week ago concerning Bregman is that he's not agreed to say, all right, I'll go short term. That hasn't happened yet. Bregman still thinks he's getting a 7-year contract. Boras is still asking for that. Is that going to change? Now, I want to make this clear. Even if it does change, I don't think the Mets are going to be in that market, because if the Mets are telling you, let's use logic here. Forget the draft pick, which would be a part of it too. But if the Mets are telling you, hey, Pete may be out of our price range now, we have a very expensive roster and we moved on, I don't think Alex Bregman on a short-term deal making more money than what they offered Pete Alonso would work in their budget either. So he's not an option for the Mets. I'm just pointing out that Scott Boras may have hit the jackpot with Juan Soto. He's had his other issues during this offseason. The fact that Bregman is still there and Alonso is still there shows you there are some issues.
I will say this much, and we've said it before. Montgomery obviously had a bad season last year, which is why he hasn't rebounded with a different contract. But if Pete or Bregman perform halfway decent, I guarantee you it's going to turn into Matt Chapman and Blake Snell, where they're going to find it, whether they're going to go back to the open market next year or they'll just extend with whatever team they're on. Matt Chapman got paid. He did. It took him most of the season to get paid, but he finally got paid. He got an extension. Blake Snell did too. So as long as they have a better season this year, they'll get paid eventually.
All right, a couple of other things, a couple of little news and notes to get to. They signed Adbert Alzolay from the Chicago Cubs as a free agent. He actually 2 years ago had a pretty damn good year out of the bullpen. He's a good arm. He is coming off of Tommy John surgery. So this is one of those, hey, we got a guy. We're going to rehab him in 2025 in Alzolay, but in 2026, he could be a big part of the bullpen. Got no problem with that. Remember, we talked about the Mets doing that potentially with a guy like Brandon Woodruff. So they do this with a bullpen arm and Adbert Alzolay. Good little pickup. Good little sneaky pickup by David Stearns. That's number one. Number two, let's get to Max Scherzer. Can we get to Max Scherzer? So Max Scherzer had a workout, according to Pat Ragazzo, that a bunch of teams checked out. Okay, Mets checked it out. Yankees checked it out. Blue Jays checked it out. The Braves checked it out. I could totally see the Braves making a move like that. I think that Max Scherzer is probably done. Now, the difference between him and Justin Verlander is that I think Verlander is really done, especially the way he pitched down the stretch last year. Scherzer isn't pitching like a guy who's done. He just can't stay healthy. And I think there's a big difference. Like last year, he made 9 starts. He wasn't bad in those 9 starts. He pitched to a 3.95 ERA. he was still striking out 8.5 guys per 9 innings, not nearly what he used to in his Hall of Fame career, but he wasn't walking a lot of guys. He was okay. Like, I'm not going to say he was anything like he used to be, but he was certainly serviceable. The problem was he made 9 starts. So the issue with Max Scherzer as a pitcher, before I give you emotional reaction to all this, is that at 40 years old, 41 in July, I just can't see him getting through a full season. He hasn't been able to do it the last couple of years. Even in the year of 2022, where he had such a good regular season for us, he made 23 starts. He missed a lot of time. And then ultimately, when he got his ass kicked in the postseason, the excuse we heard was he's not healthy. So my view on Max Scherzer, just 10,000 feet above or 30,000 feet above, whatever that stupid phrase is that I think he can still pitch. He can't stay healthy. Also, I am never against bringing a guy in on a 1-year deal, especially when there's incentives involved or it's a minor league invite or what could go wrong with that? There's no negative to that. There's no risk to that. So if Max Scherzer never pitched for the New York Mets, never did, put up the exact same career numbers, exact same career arc as we sat here today, knowing the Met rotation, knowing they're going to have a 6-man, knowing you never have enough starters, I would not be against Max Scherzer. And I'll give you the equivalence of that. If Clayton Kershaw was doing a workout and wants to keep pitching and he's bouncing around the league, I would have no issue bringing in Clayton Kershaw, even though I know he can't stay healthy. It would just be, as a 6th guy, why not? Maybe I get 9 good starts out of him. No big deal. Every game counts. I got no issue with it. So with all that said, you'd say, well, then just bring him in. I can't stand Max Scherzer. And I'm going to try to be rational. I try to be rational on the Rico. I'm not always successful, but I try. I do not want to root for him. I don't want to look at him. I don't want to watch him. I don't want to see him. And even if he's great, like even if he pitches well for the Mets and somehow by accident makes 20 starts, you could never trust him in a big spot. Can never do it. So I hear this and I say, I'm good. I'll pass. Despite everything I just said that would point in the direction of you got nothing to lose. I do not want a redo with Max Scherzer, who I think it was right here on the Rico Brogna. I once coined him. What was the term I used that got
mercenaries piece of crap?
That's right. Mercenary piece of craps, I think was the phrase. I would not like to remarry the mercenary piece of craps.
However, I'm going to throw one little curveball in there. What if by signing Max Scherzer, Boris will then say, you know what? I'll get Pete to sign.
Great question, Pete. Then I would say, okay. Then I would accept it. Everybody's got a price for the $1 million man. Ha, 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 ha. Well, we again want to apologize for the horrible audio quality of our live from Amazin Day Rico Brogna, but lesson learned. The next time we do a live Rico, and we are not dismayed by this. We are not put off by this. We will figure it out technologically. We will make sure everything sounds okay. So if you want to give it a try, episode, 417? Episode 417, Hoff?
Yeah, 417, exactly.
If you want to give it a try, give it a try. We just do warn you, the audio quality has its issues. You may have seen the camera issues on YouTube if you consume it that way. But we did talk to Bobby Valentine, David Wright, and Mookie Wilson, and there were some really fun conversations. So check it out if you so want to give it a try. A lot of Ricos coming up this week as we get closer to spring training, including this is the week. I'm telling you, this is the week we're going to finally do it. We've given you enough time on your homework assignment. We're going to do a whole Rico Brogna reacting to the rewatch. Opening day, 1985. If you haven't watched the game, if you have any interest in watching the game, we've got the link up. Check it out. It's on YouTube. Opening day 1985. We're going to do a Rico rewatch on that. And, of course, more reaction to everything going on here at the tail end of this offseason. And we will give you more details as the weeks come up concerning our spring training trip. We may even try another live show. That could be fun down in Florida. But we'll be down there March 8th and March 9th, and we do plan on doing some Rico Brognas from spring training. Of course, you can email us, thericob@gmail.com, and we will certainly read a lot of your emails in the upcoming Rico Brognas. Thank you very much for listening, for downloading, subscribing. If you were at Citi-Field and I had a chance to meet you, always an honor. Great meeting you. Great talking to you. Thank you for listening to Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.